Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Thor: The Dark World in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Thor: The Dark World. Will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie also. We will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film apart from this. We will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Thor: The Dark World is a 2013 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character Thor, produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. It is the sequel to Thor 2011 and the 8th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU. The film was directed by Alan Taylor from a screenplay by Christopher Yost and the writing team of Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. It stars Chris Hemsworth as Thor alongside Natalie Portman, Tom Hiddleston, Stellan Skarsgård, Idris Elba, Christopher Eccleston, Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje, Kat Dennings, Ray Stevenson, Zachary Levi, Tadanobu Asano, Jamie Alexander, Rene Russo, and Anthony Hopkins. In the film, Thor and Loki, Hiddleston, team up to save the 9 realms from the Dark Elves. Development of a sequel to Thor began in April 2011 when producer Kevin Feige announced plans for it to follow the MCU crossover film The Avengers 2012. In July, Thor director Kenneth Branagh withdrew from the sequel. Taylor was hired to replace him as director in January 2012. The supporting cast filled out that August with the hiring of Eccleston and Akinnuoye-Agbaje as the film's villains. Filming took place from September to December 2012, primarily in Surrey, England, as well as in Iceland and London. Taylor wanted the film to be more grounded than Thor, inspired by his work on Game of Thrones, 2011 to 2019. He hired Carter Burwell to compose the score, but Marvel replaced Burwell with Brian Tyler. Thor: The Dark World premiered at the Odeon Leicester Square in London on October 22, 2013, and was released in the United States on November 8th as part of Phase 2 of the MCU. The film was a commercial success, grossing over $644 million worldwide and becoming the 10th highest-grossing film of 2013. It received praise for the performances of Hemsworth and Hiddleston, visual effects, and action sequences, but was criticized for its generic villain and lack of depth. Retrospectively, Taylor expressed dissatisfaction with the film and said Marvel substantially altered it from his original vision during post-production. 2 sequels have been released: Thor Ragnarok 2017 and Thor Love and Thunder 2022. Plot: Eons ago, Bor, the father of Odin, wages war against the dark elf Malekith, who seeks to unleash a weapon known as the Aether on the 9 realms. After defeating Malekith's forces on their homeworld of Svartalfheim, Bor sends the Aether to a hidden world that no one can reach. However, Malekith escapes with his lieutenant Algrim and a handful of dark elves before going into suspended animation. In present-day Asgard, Odin imprisons Loki for his various crimes on Earth. Meanwhile, Thor and his companions repel marauders on Vanaheim to pacify the 9 realms following the reconstruction of the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge between realms which was destroyed 2 years earlier. The Asgardians learn that the convergence, a rare alignment of the 9 realms, is imminent. As the event approaches, portals linking the worlds appear at random. In London, astrophysicist Dr. Jane Foster travels to an abandoned factory where such portals have appeared. Foster is teleported to the hidden world where the Aether is stored, and it enters her body. Thor finds Foster and takes her to Asgard, where Odin warns that the Aether will not only kill her, but herald a catastrophic prophecy. Malekith, awakened by the Aether's release, attacks Asgard searching for Foster. Thor's mother Frigga is killed trying to protect her. Thor recruits Loki, who knows of a secret portal to Svartalfheim where they plan to confront Malekith to avenge Frigga. On Svartalfheim, Loki uses an illusion to trick Malekith into drawing the Aether out of Foster, but Thor's attempt to destroy it fails. Malekith merges with the Aether and leaves as Loki seemingly dies while killing Algrim. Thor and Foster reunite in London with Foster's mentor, Dr. Erik Selvig. They learn that Malekith plans to plunge the entire universe into darkness by unleashing the Aether at the center of the convergence in Greenwich. Thor battles Malekith across multiple worlds, while Jane's group use their scientific equipment to transport Malekith to Svartalfheim, where he is crushed by his own ship. Thor returns to Asgard, where he declines Odin's offer to take the throne. After he leaves, Loki is revealed to be alive and impersonating Odin. In a mid-credits scene, Volstagg and Sif visit the Collector and entrust the Aether to his care. With the Tesseract already in Asgard, they fear that having two Infinity Stones so close together would be dangerous. As they leave, the Collector states his desire to acquire the other 5 stones. In a post-credits scene, Foster and Thor reunite on Earth. Music. Main article, Thor: The Dark World soundtrack. In August 2012, Patrick Doyle said that he had discussions with the director about potentially returning to score the film. By April 2013, Carter Burwell had been hired to compose the score, but by the following month he left the film over creative differences. In June 2013, Marvel hired Brian Tyler, who scored Iron Man 3, 2013, to replace Burwell. Tyler said the previous film had an attitude and was grounded in limitations, whereas the Thor film allowed for all-out regal themes that could be as epic as I could make them. The composer described the Dark World as science fiction meeting classic medieval war, leading to a score that drew from works of both genres, such as Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings. Azam Ali is a featured vocalist on the score. The soundtrack was released digitally on October 28, 2013. Release. Theatrical. The world premiere of Thor: The Dark World took place on October 22, 2013, at the Odeon Leicester Square in London. The film was released theatrically in the UK 8 days later, on October 30th. The film held its North American premiere at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood, Los Angeles, and was released into US theaters on November 8, 2013. Thor: The Dark World is part of Phase 2 of the MCU. Home media. Thor: The Dark World was released by Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment for digital download on February 4, 2014, and on Blu-ray disc, 3D Blu-ray, and DVD on February 25, 2014. The physical media release includes deleted scenes, extended scenes, a gag reel, audio commentary by the cast and crew, and a Marvel one-shot short film entitled All Hail the King, featuring Ben Kingsley reprising his role as Trevor Slattery from Iron Man 3. The film was also collected in a 13-disc box set titled Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 2 Collection, which includes all of the Phase 2 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was released on December 8, 2015. Reception. Box office. Thor: The Dark World earned $206.4 million in North America and $438.4 million in other markets for a worldwide total of $644.8 million. It surpassed the gross of its predecessor after just 19 days of its release. Deadline Hollywood calculated the film's net profit as $139.4 million when factoring together all expenses and revenues for the film. Thor: The Dark World made an estimated $7.1 million in Thursday night showings, more than double the midnight gross of its predecessor. On Friday, November 8, 2013, the film topped the box office with $31.9 million, including Thursday night earnings, which is 25% higher than the original film's opening day gross one. Through Sunday, the film remained at the number 1 spot with $85.7 million, which is a 30% increase over its predecessor's opening weekend. This was the largest November opening for a film distributed by Disney, surpassing The Incredibles. Thor: The Dark World topped the box office in North America during its first 2 weekends, before being overtaken by The Hunger Games: Catching Fire in its third weekend. On its midweek opening day of Wednesday, October 30th, 2013, Thor: The Dark World earned $8.2 million from 33 territories, including the United Kingdom and France, where it opened higher than its predecessor. During its first 3 days, the film earned $45.2 million, and by the end of the weekend, after expanding into 3 more territories, it totaled $109.4 million over 5 days, finishing in first place in all 36 countries. Its largest openings were recorded in China, $21 million, the United Kingdom, $13.8 million, and France, $9.94 million. It topped the box office outside North America on its first 3 weekends of release. In total earnings, its largest markets are China, $55.3 million, Russia and the CIS, $35.7 million, Brazil, $27.7 million, and the United Kingdom, $26.2 million. Late in Thor: The Dark World, Chris Hemsworth's title character crash lands on a British underground platform. He's dazed but knows that he has to get back to fighting Malekith, ex-Doctor Who Christopher Eccleston, a malevolent dark elf. Thor asks for directions back to Greenwich and promptly boards the train. As the train lurches forward, a woman falls onto his broad chest. He smiles knowingly. This scene is one of several high points in Thor: The Dark World, a blocky fantasy adventure whose plot is never as exciting as its characters. All 3 Iron Man films have this same basic problem, but story was never more important than personality in those earlier films. Thor: The Dark World's characters are often very charming, but they're only so much fun when they're stuck going through the motions. Thor: The Dark World mostly concerns Malekith's Transformers worthy schemes. Malekith was previously put in his place by Bor, Thor's grandfather, when he tried to turn matter back into antimatter using Aether, an ancient all-powerful energy source. Now, after Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, Thor's super-smart human scientist, not-quite-girlfriend, stumbles upon some Aether, Malekith returns. Leading an armada of black splinter-shaped spaceships, he sets out for Asgard, home of Thor and his fellow Norse gods. But the Asgardians are still recovering from Thor's half-brother Loki's, Tom Hiddleston, recent failed coup. Now, Thor and Loki must team up to save Jane, Earth, Asgard, and the other 8 realms of existence from complete annihilation. Malekith may be a major threat to life and the universe as we know it, but he's just one of a handful of characters who are run through their paces in Thor: The Dark World. This sequel is consistently unfocused in that sense. Major characters get to flex their muscles for a scene or two, but only when they're absolutely needed. There are a couple of scenes where characters get to be both important and exciting, like when Kursa, Adewale Mr. Eko Akinwue Agbaje, Malekith's superpowered henchman, breaks into Asgard and starts a prison riot. But there are just as many scenes where inherently exciting characters like Thor kill time connecting plot points. Watching Thor make quick work of an inconsequential enemy in an opening scene should be fun, but the scene has no flair to it and feels like a perfunctory introduction to the character. The first scene in the film where Hemsworth gets to be really charming comes later, when he's squabbling with Hiddleston about operating a commandeered dark elven spaceship. The squabbling itself isn't that funny, but the scene's payoff is. Hemsworth's eyes light up as he gets the ship to fly, instantly reminding you why you came in the first place. Still, more often than not, Thor: The Dark World is more busy than exciting. There are a couple subplots too many, like the one with frequently naked super scientist Erik Selvig, Stellan Skarsgård, and too many characters that are introduced with a promising scene, like Rainbow Bridge Guardian Heimdall, Idris Elba, are forgotten during the film's climactic battle. The film's world also generally looks slapped together, especially the Dark Elves, who look like a cross between Land of the Lost Sleestaks and Doctor Who's Cybermen. Visually, Thor: The Dark World is a step back after Thor, which at least looked unique enough. But in most other respects, Thor: The Dark World is a step in the right direction. The scene where Thor enlists Loki's help is a perfect example of the film's slight but memorable improvements. The conversation they have is inconsequential, but watching a defeated Loki surrounded by overturned furniture and a reddish-brown PG-13 blood substitute on his prison cell's walls makes the scene worthwhile. Hemsworth and Hiddleston have such good chemistry that it sometimes looks like Thor and Loki will kiss before Thor and Jane will. There's just enough tension and humor in Thor: The Dark World to make the film's otherwise listless proceedings worth watching, but only just. Review: Thor: The Dark World. This new Thor film delivers a hammer blow of boredom to the back of the head. It is another franchise product from the Marvel pipeline, conceived without much inspiration in a CGI green screen world, and without the sprightliness and novelty of the previous Thor outing, directed by Kenneth Branagh. Chris Hemsworth returns as the great god, still carrying a torch, as well as that hammer, for his earthling love, astrophysicist hottie Jane Foster, gamely played by Natalie Portman. But now he faces a new enemy, the apocalyptically boring Malekith, leader of the Dark Elves, played by Christopher Eccleston and hell-bent on unleashing a fog of dullness on the universe. Malekith stands around glowering with pale-faced, pointy-eared resentment, like a mature student who has been thrown out of a goth pub for smoking. Catastrophically, this development downgrades the status of this franchise's star performer, Thor's wicked brother Loki, played by Tom Hiddleston. Loki is once again languishing in Lecter-esque imprisonment, and Hiddleston brings to it all the usual silky-voiced malice, wit, and fun, like James Mason's wicked great-nephew. He's given a bit to do when Thor realizes he must make common cause with this duplicitous sibling to defeat Malekith. But his sidelining is a big disappointment. Even Hiddleston can't rescue this Norse epic of tedium. Thor: The Dark World succeeds at building on the Thor and Avengers foundation to offer a bigger and more exciting adventure for Marvel's God of Thunder. In Thor: The Dark World, Thor, Chris Hemsworth and his Asgardian forces have kept busy attempting to bring order to the Nine Realms, after they were thrown into warring chaos following the destruction of the Bifrost in Thor and Loki's invasion of New York in Avengers. In her efforts to reunite with Thor, Jane Foster Natalie Portman discovers an ancient and extremely powerful weapon, the Aether, which subsequently awakens one of Asgard's most dangerous foes, Malekith, along with his dark elf army. Informed of Jane's troubles by the Asgardian sentry Heimdall, Idris Elba, Thor returns to Earth to find and protect his love, setting off a series of events that force the God of Thunder into a desperate partnership to save Jane and rid the realms of Malekith, Christopher Eccleston, before the villain unleashes destruction upon the cosmos. For Thor: The Dark World, Marvel Studios hired Game of Thrones alum Alan Taylor to help maintain Thor and Loki's post-Avengers momentum, replacing Thor director Kenneth Branagh, and deliver a solid, standalone Phase 2 installment. For the most part, Taylor succeeds, as Thor: The Dark World successfully builds upon characters and storylines from the first Thor, as well as Avengers, while providing entertaining and humorous moments and exciting action set pieces along the way. Certain aspects of the story are underdeveloped, and some filmgoers might once again have trouble suspending disbelief as to why S.H.I.E.L.D. And the other Avengers aren't around to lend a hand. But overall, Thor: The Dark World accomplishes exactly what a sequel, especially one couched in a shared cinematic universe, should do: increase the excitement and dig deeper into fan-favorite characters. Like several Marvel Studios offerings and the recent Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series, the main storyline in the Thor sequel centers on a new piece of supernatural technology, much like the Tesseract before it, that reignites an ancient battle between heroes and villains. While the setup is extremely straightforward, the script is surprisingly adept at balancing and developing ongoing story arcs, like the dynamic between Thor and Loki, as well as the God of Thunder's future role in Asgard, and larger shared universe tie-ins, i.e. much appreciated exposition and backstory, plus a few choice cameos. Unfortunately, in the middle of the delicate balancing act, most of the new additions, especially antagonist Malekith and his Dark Elves, remain underdeveloped. The Dark Elves significantly up the ante from Thor's first solo adventure, resulting in a number of thrilling and visually stunning action beats. However, compared to the quasi-Shakespearean story of sibling rivalry, alienation, and betrayal that fueled Loki as Thor 1's antagonist, Malekith is little more than an evil leader trope. Despite the best efforts of Doctor Who star Christopher Eccleston, Malekith, as well as his right-hand monster Cursa, Adewale Akinnuoye-Agba, fall short of being round and captivating villains, instead relegated to spouting exposition and platitudes before turning into hypercharged punching bags for Thor and Mjolnir. Luckily, Loki picks up a lot of the slack, as Tom Hiddleston once again plays the fan-favorite trickster with a smart mix of humor, charm, menace, and moral ambiguity. Providing Loki with an adequate story arc and substantial screen time probably contributed to the Dark World's thinly drawn Dark Elves, but most moviegoers will likely agree that Taylor made the right call, since Hiddleston's scenes are often the most interesting, entertaining, not to mention most emotional, in the film. The Thor-Loki-Odin power struggle and meditations on what it takes to be a good king were some of the best moments in Thor 1, and the Dark World sustains and even builds upon these ideas with fresh developments. Anyone who didn't respond to the fish-out-of-water story from the original movie will find Hemsworth's Thor is significantly more commanding this round. While the character is still at the heart of some humorous moments, the Dark World's Thor is a hardened as well as battle-worn leader, focused on protecting the people he loves at any cost and no longer concerned with personal glory. A more resolute Thor means that the Avenger is also more heroic, with some downright kick-butt action moments that showcase his powers, not just his strength, and his iconic hammer. As a result, the movie's climax is much more exhilarating and downright inventive than its predecessor. Even though Lady Sif, Jaime Alexander, and the Warriors 3 aren't given quite as much to do this time, the Dark World nonetheless utilizes several returning supporting characters, most notably Jane Foster, Portman, and Heimdall, Elba, who are both much more active and instrumental in the sequel. Darcy Lewis, Kat Dennings, Eric Selvig, Stellan Skarsgård, and newcomer, intern to the intern, Ian Boothby, Jonathan Howard, once again handle comedy relief and exposition duty. Dennings nails her timing even in moments of tension, elevating the previously one-note Darcy character into one of the Dark World's most enjoyable inclusions. As mentioned, the film doesn't escape all of the pitfalls of a shared universe film experience. The Dark World is overstuffed with key characters, at expense of its villains. And some moviegoers will still have trouble suspending disbelief that Thor and his ragtag group of do-gooders are alone in stopping an enemy that seeks to destroy all 9 realms. That said, there are enough knowing nods to the Avengers and Battle of New York to prevent the Dark World from being an entirely isolated experience, as the sequel manages to bind the film to prior events, as well as tease what audiences will see in future installments. Note, make sure you stay through both the mid-credits and post-credits scenes. The film is also playing in 3D, but much like the first installment, springing for the added cost is entirely optional, not essential. Anyone expecting a lot of pop-out moments or exceptionally inventive depth-of-field shots will probably walk away underwhelmed. Nevertheless, several scenes do take advantage of three-dimensional visuals, and Asgard is more immersive in the premium format. In the end, Thor: The Dark World succeeds at building on the Thor and Avengers foundation to offer a bigger and more exciting adventure for Marvel's God of Thunder. At times, the film juggles too many fan-favorite elements and a few are underserved, most notably Lady Sif, the Warriors 3, and the Dark Elves. Regardless, Taylor's Phase 2 installment manages to walk a fine and challenging line between digging deeper into its main cast of characters and the continuing Marvel Universe storylines. Some moviegoers may be divided on certain plot beats and developments, but overall the Dark World manages to build momentum and enthusiasm for Thor's return in the Avengers Age of Ultron, which, given the stakes, logistical challenges, and Marvel's grand ambition for a shared universe, is a major accomplishment. The Thor film allowed for ball-out regal themes that could be as epic as I could make them. The composer described of the Dark World as science fiction meeting classic medieval war, leading to a score that drew from works of both genres, such as the Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings. A.T. Vocalist on the score Dot, as the soundtrack was released digitally on October 28, 2013. Marketing in March 2013, Marvel announced the release of a 2-issue comic book prelude by writer Sra Kylie Christopher Yusta and artist Skada. In June 2013 and April 2013, Marvel released the first trailer for A Thor: The Dark World. A Forbes has said, This trailer fits nicely into that larger marketing push for Marvel's brand. It puts all of the recognizable characters from the first film front and center, presents the action as a team event, reminiscent of the Avengers, and once again Loki, who was quite popular with audience as it makes an appearance at Los Angeles time. Nessa said evident throughout the trailer is director Alan Taylor's influence. The Game of Thrones as a director's hand can be seen in the battle sequences, and escorted a bright and shiny kingdom under director Kenneth Branagh seems grittier in the sequel. In July at the 2013 San Diego Comic-Con, Hiddleston introduced footage from the film to audiences in character as Loki. Also in July, a Gam Lofta announced that a mobile video game titled Thor: The Dark World, the official game, would be released in conjunction with the release of the film in November. The theatrical poster for the film was released in early August 2013. Kirsten Nakuna of Business Insider criticized the poster for its lack of originality, noting its similarities to one of the posters of Fear on Man 3, both of which included the female lead clinging to the male lead with both looking in opposite directions. Antagonists prominently displayed in the background and supporting characters featured on the side. Additionally, Marvel released a second trailer for the film as part of YouTube's Geek Week. Forbes has said, "This 150-second trailer is basically just an extended version of last April's 106 teaser, and that this trailer fails to showcase what's new this time around, making audiences question if they really don't have much else to offer." The Los Angeles Times said that the trailer suggests an ominous epic scale for the sequel, and that the collaboration between Thor and Loki promises to be especially interesting. Later in the month, producer Kevin Feige and cast members Thompson, Natalie Portman, and Anthony Hopkins presented additional footage at Disney 23A Expo. Also in August 2013, Disney announced plans to promote the film with an attraction at a Disneyland. The attraction, call it Adore Treasures of Asgard, located next to the Stark Industries exhibit in Sadia Invention. Xena Tomorrowland opened on November 1st, 2013, and features displays of Asgardian relics and transports guests of Odin's throne room, where they are greeted by Thor. The 8th episode of Fan Marvels, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., titled The Well, takes place in the aftermath of the events of Feather: The Dark World. It first aired on November 19th, 2013. Jamie Alexander reprised her role as Cynthia Agents of SHITL. Episode Yes Men, which aired on March 11th, 2014, released the world premiere. Rio Foth: The Dark World. It took place on October 22nd, 2013, at the Aeolian, Leicester Square in London. The film was released theatrically in the UK 8 days later on October 30th. The film held its North American premiere at the Al Capitan Theatre in Hollywood, Los Angeles, and was released into U.S. theaters on November 8, 2013. Thor: The Dark World is part of FAS of the MCU Home Media Tour. The Dark World was released by Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment for a digital download on February 4th, 2014, and a no Blu-ray disc, 3D Blu-ray, and on February 25th, 2014 at the physical media. Release includes deleted scenes, extended scenes, a gag reel, audio, commentary by the cast and crew, and a Marvel one showed a short film entitled All Hail the King, featuring a band, Kingsley reprising his role, also Trevor Slattery of Roma Iron Man 3. The film was also collected in a 13-disco box set titled Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 2 Collection, which includes all of the Phase 2 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was released on December 8, 2015. Reception door. The Dark World earned $206.4 million in North America and $438.4 million in other markets for a worldwide total of $644.88 million, and surpassed the gross of its predecessor after just 19 days of its release. A deadline, Hollywood calculated the film's net profit as $139.4 million. When factoring together all expenses and revenues for the film, Thor: The Dark World made an estimated $7.1 million in Thursday night showings, more than double the midnight gross of its predecessor. On Friday, November 8, 2013, the film topped the box office with $31.9 million, including Thursday night earnings, which is 25% higher than the original film's opening day gross. Through Sunday, the film remained at the number one spot with $85.7 million, which is a 30% increase over its predecessor's opening weekend. This was the largest November opening for a film distributed by Disney, surpassing of The Incredibles' A Thor. The Dark World topped the box office in North America during its first 2 weekends, before being overtaken by The Hunger Games: Catching Fi in its third weekend. On its midweek opening day of October 30th, 2013, or The Dark World earned $8.22 million from 33 territories, including the United Kingdom and France, where it opened, higher than its predecessor. During its first 3 days, the film earned $45.2 million. And by the end of the weekend, after expanding into 3 more territories, it totaled $19.4 million over 5 days, finishing in first place in all 36 countries. Its largest openings were recorded in China, $21 million at the United Kingdom, $13.8 and France, $9.94 million atop the box office outside North America on its first 3 weekends of release. In total earnings, its largest markets are China, $55.3 million, Russia and assist, $35.7 million, Brazil, $27.7 million, and the United Kingdom, $26.2 million. Critical response: the review Agro-Atasa reported an approval rating of 67%, with an average score of 6/10 based on 290 reviews. The website's consensus reads, "It may not be the finest film to watch come from the Marvel Universe, but it still offers plenty of the humor and high-stakes action that fans have come to expect." It was the lowest-rated MCU film on Rotten Tomatoes until the release of Fernalsa in 2021. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned a score of 54 out of 100 based on 44 reviews, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences pulled by Asinascaria gave the film an average based on a grading scale ranging from A+ to F. Ben Childo-Fad The Guardian said thanks to Hiddleston and Hemsworth's impressive collective charisma, Thor: The Dark World is far from a franchise killer. Justin Chango Favaria wrote this robust, impersonal visual effects showpiece proves buoyant and unpretentious enough to offset its stew of otherwise derivative fantasy action elements. Alonso Durald Father said Thor: The Dark World that delivers the good saw action, otherworldly grandiosity, romance, humor above and beyond its predecessor. Simon Abrams, writing for RogerRobert.com, said there's just enough tension and humorine adore The Dark World to make the film's otherwise listless proceedings worth watching. But only just conversely, Tim Romeo, Fed Daily Telegraph, has said it feels entirely made by committee of the definition of house style without a personal stamp in sight. A Leslie Falprin Hollywood reporter said, although director Alan Taylor manages to get things going properly for the final battle in London, the long stretches before that on Asgrid and the other branches of Fandrasila are a drag like filler. Episodes of Game of Thrones but without the narrative complexity, mythical heft, all-pervading sexiness. Michael Phillips of the Los Angeles Times as a describe at Thor: The Dark World as having the same old threats of galaxy annihilation spiced with fairly entertaining fish-out-of-water jokes. Agent at Katsu. The New York Times said the battle scenes are as lacking in heat and coherence as the central love story. Taylor expressed dissatisfaction with the finished film and blamed its mixed reception on changes Marvel Studios made during post-production, which he felt conflicted with his creative vision. In 2015, he called working in All: The Dark World a particularly wrenching experience, and said in 2021 that the experience made him hesitant to continue directing. Taylor expressed interest in creating a director's queue, similar to Zach, Snyder's Justice 2021, though he observed that Marvel was likely not interested in it, or Ragnarok Thor. Ragnarok was released on November 3rd, 17, directed by a Eric Pearson and a Craig Kiley. A Christopher Justa wrote the screenplay, with Kevin Feige producing a Hemsworth Hiddleston. Hopkins, Elba, Asano, Levi, and Stevenson reprise their roles as Thor, Loki, Odin. Heimdall, Hogan, Vandral, and Volstagg, respectively, a Willie Marker Foa, and a Benedict Cumberbatch and Parasa, Bruce Banner, Hula, and a Doctor Strange year, respectively reprising their roles from previous MCU films. A Cate Blanchett, Tessa Thompson, a Jeff Goldblum, and a Carl Bana joined the cast of Hela, a Valky, a Grandmaster, and a Scourge, respectively. Thor, Love and Thunder, A fourth film titled At Thor, Love and Thunder was released on July 8th, 2022. A. Hemsworth, Thompson, and Ela reprised their roles. With Portman, Alexander Dennings, and Skarsgård Road returning after not appearing in Ragnarok. Portman portrayed her character taking on the mantle of Thor, similar to the comics. Additionally, a Chris Pratt, a Palm Clemente E. Bautista, a Karen Gillan, a Van Diesel, a Bradley Cooper, and a Sean Gunn, a Repris, Peter Quill, Star-Lord, a Mantis, a Drax, the Destroyer, a Nebula, a Groot, a Rocket, and a Kralin, Aubrey, a Christian Bailey, joined the cast as the villain, a Gore the God Butcher Late, and Thor the Dark World. Chris Hemsworth's title character crash lands on a British underground platform. He's dazed, but knows that he has to get back to fighting Makithix. Christopher Eccleston, a male relevant dark elf. Thor asks for directions back to Greenwich and promptly boards the train. As the train lurches forward, a woman falls onto his broad chest. He smiles knowingly. This scene is one of several high points in Thor the Dark World, a blocky fantasy adventure whose plot is never as exciting as its characters. All three Iron Man films have this same basic problem, but story was never more important than personality in those earlier films. Thor the Dark World as characters are often very charming, but they're only so much fun when they're stuck going through the motions. Thor the Dark World mostly concerns Molokoth's Transformers' worthy schemes. Molokoth was previously put in his place by Thor's grandfather when he tried to turn matter back into antimatter using ether, an ancient all-powerful energy source. Now, after Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, Thor's super smart human scientist, not quite girlfriend, stumbles upon some ether. Molokoth returns, leading an armada of black splinter-shaped spaceships. He sets out for Asgard, home of Thor and his fellow Norse gods. But the Asgardians are still recovering from Thor's half-brother Loki's Tom Hiddleston recent failed coup. Now Thor and Loki must team up to save Jane, Earth, Asgard, and the other 8 realms of existence from complete annihilation. Mleth may be a major threat to life in the universe as we know it, but he's just one of a handful of characters who are run through their paces in Thor the Dark World. This sequel is consistently unfocused in that sense. Major characters get to flex their muscles for a scene or two, but only when they're absolutely needed. There are a couple of scenes where characters get to be both important and exciting, like when Cursa duel Mr. Echo Ag Bajemaket. Superpowered henchman breaks into Asgard and starts a prison riot. But there are just as many scenes where inherently exciting characters like Thor kill time, connecting plot points. Watching Thor make quick work of an inconsequential enemy in an opening scene should be fun. But the scene has no flair to it and feels like a pre-functor introduction to the character. The first scene in the film where Hemsworth gets to be really charming comes later when he's squabbling with Hiddleston about operating a commandeered dark elven spaceship. The squabbling itself isn't that funny, but the scene's payoff is. Hemsworth's eyes light up as he gets the ship to fly, instantly reminding you why you came in the first place. Still, more often than not, Thor the Dark World is more busy than exciting. There are a couple subplots, too many like the one with frequently naked super scientist Eric Salvig, Stalin Scar's Squid, and too many characters that are introduced with a promising scene like Rainbow Bridgig, Guardian Heimdall, Idris Elba are forgotten during the film's climactic battle. The film's world also generally looks slapped together, especially the Dark Elves, who look like a cross between Land of the Lost Assless Tax and Dr. W, as Cyberman. Visually, Thor the Dark World is a step back after Thor, which at least looked unique enough. But in most other respects, Thor the Dark World is a step in the right direction. The scene where Thor enlists Loki's help is a perfect example of the film's slight but memorable improvements. The conversation they have is inconsequential, but watching a defeated Loki surrounded by overturned furniture and a reddish-brown PG-13 blood substitute on his prison cell's walls makes the scene worthwhile. Hemsworth and Hiddleston have such good chemistry that it sometimes looks like Thor and Loki will kiss before Thor, and Jane will. There's just enough tension and humor in Thor the Dark World to make the film's otherwise listless proceedings worth watching, but only just in this sequel. Thor Chris. Hemsworthy is back on Asgard while Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, is trying to move on since Thor has vanished from Earth for the past 2 years. Just when everything seems to be in order, Darcy Kat Dennings stumbles upon a mysterious portal in an abandoned building. While investigating the building, AJ is sucked through a portal where her body is taken over by a dark spirit that causes a rift in the galaxy. It isn't long before Thor must spring back into action and help not only save Earth, but the entire galaxy from a dark elf known as Malakth, Christopher Eccleston. When the original Thor hit theaters back in 2011, I remember audiences having very mixed feelings about it. I think the character of Thor is probably one of the lesser-known characters in the Marvel Universe, and therefore people were curious to see the film. However, the reception was rather mixed. A lot of people stated that the original was a complete mess of the film, with comments about unnecessary characters, bad acting, and awful CGI effects. The Marvel fans, on the other hand, enjoyed the film for the most part, although they all admitted that there was plenty of room for improvement. Well, ladies, gentlemen, fanboys, and fangirls, I hate to say this, but truth be told, nothing much has changed from the original film in terms of quality. Thor the Dark World is a sloppy mess of a film, and this is coming from someone who sees almost every comic book movie that is released. There is so much wrong with this film that it's hard to discuss all of it without writing a mini novel. So, I will try my best to summarize the film's problems as quickly and thoroughly as possible. First, let's start with the look of the film. The opening 10 minutes looks as if you're watching video game footage. The CGI is awful and doesn't look realistic at all. The same goes for most of the first half of the film. The CGI scenes and shots of Osk really haven't improved much from the first film, even with a new director on board. I was surprised by how fake so much of the film looked. It was really distracting and took away from my overall enjoyment of the film. Also, since we were talking about the 3D adds absolutely nothing to this film. So do yourself a favor and save the $3 to $5 upcharge for the ticket and see the 2D version instead. Next, the film is just all over the place. The film jumps around too damn much and doesn't transition well at all. 1 second, and we are on Asgard with Thor, and the next minute we are on Earth with Darcy. The way that the film is edited together makes it seem like an intern got the job and just pasted the film together quickly using iMovie. There are some scenes, especially near the end, where it just feels so rushed or out of place. The end is most noticeable, simply because it comes to a close so damn quickly that it feels like they ran out of time and money. The ending, without spoiling anything, feels extremely half-assed and rushed. Thor, the Dark World, is also paced really poorly and lacks character development and depth. I was completely and utterly bored with the first half of this film. I honestly started to fall asleep because it was that dull. You have a movie about superheroes, space, and dark elves, all things that should be entertaining. Yet somehow the first half of the film is a complete snooze fest. As for the character development, well, there isn't any. Sorry to be blunt, But you would think with so many characters in this film that the story would want to focus on them, or give the viewer a reason to root for them. The only character it does that with is Loki, who I will get to in just a bit. Since I'm talking about the characters, let me talk about the horrendous dialogue and acting in a Thor. The Dark World. Anthony Hopkins as Odin is probably one of the worst casting decisions for a comic book film since George Clooney was cast as Batman Ina. Batman Robin Hopkins is awful in this first film, and he has only gotten worse in this one. The conversations between him and Thor are so laughably bad, and the dialogue is cringeworthy. There is one scene where Thor and Todden are talking, and Odin makes a reference and states, "It's like a piece of buttered bread." I seriously looked at my wife, and we both just whispered, "What the fuck?" This isn't the only cringeworthy conversation in the film, but it's definitely one that caught my attention enough to write it down in my notes. Besides Anthony Hopkins, I personally felt that Natalie Portman looked extremely uninterested to be a part of this film. Portman is probably one of my favorite female actresses, but she just didn't seem that invested in the role at all. Chris Hemsworth just seems to scream more mumble throughout the film while posing as eye candy for the ladies in the audience. Adraba and Rene Russo are again just as underused and undeveloped as they were in the first film. Plus, now we have a completely pointless new addition to the cast. Jonathan Howard, he plays Darcy's internee, and yes, he is funny as a character, but extremely unnecessary, and was only put in the film to serve as more plucky comedic relief. I am not, sure if the film needed more of this and a love interest for Darcy. Now that I got all the bad things I had to say about the film out of the way, I do have to say that the film isn't a complete disaster. The film's savior is without a doubt Loki. If it wasn't for Tom Hiddleston, a Thor the Dark World would have been on par with the Iron Man 2A for the worst film in the Marvel Avengers franchise. Hiddleston's Loki is charming, quick-witted, and has a screen presence that none of the other characters in this film have. It's during the second half of the film where he becomes a more active part of the film, and once he does, he really turns the film around. I will state this right now, Loki needs his own film. Also, to be fair, the entire second half of Thoth the Dark World is a lot fun and is extremely entertaining. I think most of it is because of Loki, but there are some other reasons as well, such as the battle sequence. The battle sequence involves transporting to various locations, which makes the fight even more entertaining. The second half also feels more campy and lighthearted, kind of like how the Avengers felt. It was like the film needed the entire first half to discover what it truly was going for. Lastly, the one and only Scars needs to be mentioned. His character, Eric, is just a riot in the film, and I love the whole running around naked bit. Honestly, when push comes to shove, I think if you can make it past the first half, the second half of Thoth the Dark World is a real treat for those of us who enjoy Marvel films. The film as a whole, though, is a mess and really needed a better editor, screenwriters, and some stronger direction than what Alan Taylor did with the film. It kind of makes sense that 5 people were involved with writing the film because it clearly is all over the place. I seriously wouldn't mind putting a third Thor to the side and instead getting an entire film based around Loki. I think if you can get a great screenplay and a solid director to direct that one, it might be as good, if not better, than the Avengers. But that's just my humble opinion. This new Thor film delivers a hammer blow of boredom to the back of the head. It is another franchise product from the Marvel pipeline. Conceived without much inspiration in a CGI green screen world and without the spritliness and novelty of the previous Thoring directed by Akanth Bran. Chris Hemsworth returns as the great god, still carrying a torch, as well as that hammer, for his earthling love. Astrophysicist Hottie Jane Foster, gamely played by Natalie Portman. But now he faces a new enemy, the apocalyptically boring Makath, leader of the Dark Elves, played by Christopher Eccleston. And hell-bent on unleashing a fog of dullness on the universe, Mocketh stands around, glowering, with pale-faced, pointy-eared resentment like a mature student who has been thrown out of a goth pub for smoking. Catastrophically, this development downgrades the status of this franchise's star performer, Thor's wicked brother Loki, played by Adam Hiddleston. Loki is once again languishing in lecturesque imprisonment, and Hiddleston brings to it all the usual silky-voiced malice, wit, and fun. Like James Mason's wicked great-nephew, he's given a bit to do when Thor realizes he must make common cause with this duplicitous sibling to defeat Makoth. But his sidelining is a big disappointment. Even Hiddleston can't rescue this nor epic of tedium. While it doesn't ascend to the heights or the freewheeling final Iron Man 3, Alan Taylor, The Dark World is a massively enjoyable film that course corrects the missteps of the original and delivers on big action, grittier subject matter, and a less pretentious take on the sometimes prohibitively dense Thor canon. One of the hardest parts of making a Thor film work is reigning in its sprawling mythology, a task for which director Alan Taylor was extremely well suited, especially in light of his extensive work in A Game of Thrones. While he lacks some of the tightness of his pristine small screen work, he is clearly having a blast telling a grand story on such a large canvas. To give you a sense of just what we're dealing with, we rejoin our Flaxen Harriet, where he finds himself restless after the events of the Battle of New York. The Avenger set in having done his duty as a chiseled fish out of watering a door. His one-eyed doll father Odin, the always delightful Anthony Hopkins, enlists his aid in a coming battle for the very fate of the universe itself. The 9 realms are going to converge upon one another, which will allow the nefarious Dark Elves, led by the perpetually pissed-off Makeith, Christopher Eccleston, to destroy Asgard and plunge the universe into darkness. Quite a mouthful, and that's just the exposition. Using an ancient, seemingly unlimited energy force known as the Ether, pronounced ether, which looks like fruit juice in zero gravity, is how Molech and his constantly scowling army plan to take over the world. To make it personal, Thor's go to astrophysicist, love interest Jane Foster. Natalie Portman accidentally becomes the host organism for the ether, which is slowly killing her and also makes her a constant target for Moab goons. While I didn't buy Portman as an astrophysicist and B having a life's work in the last film, she is more palatable this time around. Perhaps because she's given a bit more to do than just stand around looking surprised. Still, the film's tendency to play up her simply pining away for Thor grew a bit stale by the end. Then again, I may just be a diehard member of Team Sif, where the film really shines is in its exploration of the dynamic between Thor and Loki. Thompson, Hiddleston's portrayal of Loki as a wounded sociopath who craves power and acceptance in equal measure, has elevated the character beyond mere megalomaniac of the week's status. The God of Thunder has long had a contentious relationship with his half-giant, half-brother, but with him trying to destroy Asgard and unleashing an alien invasion on New York City, and now imprisoned in a cell beneath the Asgardian palace and increasingly restless, Loki is at his wit's end, particularly when his actions during an elven invasion lead to truly horrific and personal consequences. Unable to trust each other, but bound together by blood and fate, Loki and Thor must work together to save Jane Foster and the universe itself. Hiddleston and Hemsworth clearly have an excellent rapport and trust each other inherently, giving their scenes an easy charisma and a wonderful back and forth, especially during a certain hallway sequence. Thor, the dark world that is slow to start and its initial blend of sci-fi and high fantasy is jarring. Did Asgard always come off like Viking space aliens? Maybe I just didn't remember. It quickly finds its footing and offers up sumptuous visuals, a sweeping story, and enough laughs to make this one of the better offerings in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It sure as here isn't a perfect film, but I is here of a lot of fun. And when it comes to superhero flicks, that is just what Dr. Donald Blake ordered. However, we don't recommend that you show up right at the end. Come for the stings. Stick around. for the previous 100 minutes of people talking and fighting and whatnot, and you'll be rewarded with the thrilling and often surprisingly funny reminder that following Avengers Assemble and Iron Man 3, nobody is better than Marvel at this blockbuster business right now. Acutely aware of the dangers of audience fatigue. A case in point, The Dark World is Thor's third big screen appearance in as many years. A Kevin Feige, who produces all the studio's films, appears determined never to make the same film twice. But so where Kenneth Branagh's introduction to Thor was a charming, cheesy, even campy fish out of water comedy, Alan Taylor's The Dark World is a tonally, visually, thematically a different kettle of Build Snipe on a much bigger scale than the relatively low-key first installment. At times, it even feels like a sci-fi war movie. The one thing it doesn't feel like, even though it's the character can fly and is virtually indestructible as a superhero movie, it also feels very different from last year's Avengers Assemble, even though there are occasional callbacks to that movie, including a lovely riff on the Shaw Wareen and a nice cameo from, well, we won't say. First and foremost, though, this is laid out as a sequel to Thor. Structurally, it begins in the same way with a slightly clunky prologue. Complete with pretentious voiceover from Anthony Hopkins as odd exposition A that sets up both the film's main villains, the Dark Elves, and the Ether. An all-powerful source of dark matter that might as well be called the MacGuffin. From there, though, it hits the ground running, definitely reintroducing the key players from Odin to Tom Hiddleston's Loki, bound for the dungeons. After that kerfuffle in New York and Natalie Portman's Jane Foster, now living in London and going on an extremely awkward blind date with a potential new boyfriend. A fun cameo from Chris O'Dowd, who doesn't stand a chance of living up to her previous boyfriend, the God of Thunder, which brings us neatly to the main man. For the most part, Marvel has an uncanny knack for casting just the right person to make their comic book characters flesh in the wrong hands. Thor could have been an utterly ridiculous character, an ABOP demigod who looks like he's on a gap year just finding himself man, and who speaks with the oldie English twang. And yet Chris Hemsworth managed to make it work from the get-go, bringing charm and power to the role. Getting back on the Norse here, the Australian actor comports himself with admirable ease, handling the comedic and dramatic aspects equally adroitly as a rapidly maturing Thor is. Forced to rebel against his stubborn father in order to save Askr and the rest of the Nine Realms. The day Hemsworth puts the hammer down will be a shame. Likewise, Hiddleston in Loki, the English actor, is simply indelible in the role now as adept at a devilish one-liner. It's not that I don't enjoy our little chats, he tells Odin. It's just that I don't, as he is at suggesting, the layers of pain and regret that lurk beneath Loki's pining, prideful surface. Given his increased status, it must have been tempting for Feige Alan Taylor and writers Christopher Yost, Christopher Marcus, and Stephen Massey to simply bump up Hiddleston's screen time and make this the Thor and Loki show. Yet, for the first hour or so, Loki is kept largely in the background, locked away in his super high-tech jail cell, disconnected from the larger story. He doesn't even share a scene with Thor until roughly an hour in. It's only when events spiral out of control and Thor, back into a corner, turns to his brother for help that we would get that Thor and Loki show, and their time together is worth the wait. Whether they're bickering over the controls of a spacecraft or in one more serious showdown unleashing thousands of years of pent-up hurt and rage, the treatment of Loki here is akin to that of Magneto in X-Men 2. He's still a villain, constantly mocking and taunting his older brother, yet an ambiguous one. And there's a fair bit of dramatic potential in his inner conflict, which leaves it to Christopher Eccleston as Makith, the leader of the Dark Elves, to fill the Loki-shaped hole. The Dark Elves and their groovy spacecraft are visually striking, and they're positioned almost as an Al-Qaeda-type force, a race of fundamentalist warriors whose commitment to their cause is so great that they'll die for it. The prologue sees Makeith ordering effectively mass suicide bombings, but Mleth himself is ultimately a rather bland generic villain, with Eccleston reduced to growling guttural threats in a made-up language for much of the movie. That said, the final showdown between Thor and Mag is gloriously entertaining. Yes, it's set in a city, London, with the ever-telegenic Greenwich coming to the fore again. And yes, it features two powerful foes knocking 7 shades out of each other. But this isn't the city-smashing snooze fist that mired Man of Steel's climax. Instead, it's tricksy and inventive, constantly wrong-footing not just the audience, but its combatants to great and often genuinely hilarious effect for a movie that has darkened its title and which is a darker people die as Greer as befitting Alan Taylor's Game of Thrones heritage. Thor 2.0 is consistently amusing, and the 3 biggest laughs in the movie all come during this sequence. Say a bold gamble, when as tensibly the fate of the universe itself is at stake. There are flaws. There are always flaws. There are signs that the story may at one point have been in flux. A potential love triangle between Thor, Jane, and Sif goes nowhere, for example. And it's also packed with the SSM glow of fridge moments, those pesky plot holes that will keep you awake at 3 a.m. while its grasp on science, or as Thor would have it, magic, is fairly flimsy, with respected actors spouting nonsense about gravitons and wibbly flubs like they're in a 1950s B movie where no Professor Brian Cox, but it's almost certain to take this year's Bad Movie Science Award. But the whole thing clips along at such a brisk rate at just over 100 minutes, not including credits or post-credit stings or post-post-credit stings. It wraps up when most blockbusters are grinding their gears and is so entertaining that it doesn't seem to matter. Now that's magic. Science. It's a weird feeling to see a huge tentpole blockbuster superhero movie like a Thor: The Dark World and feel like it's just okay. My reactions to these movies are typically much stronger. I'm either way excited at just how well it captures the essence of the comic books on which it is based, or I'm majorly disappointed at just how wrong they get it with the Thor: The Dark World. I'm neither. I'm kind of indifferent. I liked a lot of the movie. But there's probably just as much that either doesn't work or doesn't make an impression. The typical model for the superhero movie is that the first movie is a mess, but sets up the hero's origins and lets us get to know the character, while the second movie really lets it rip. A Thor: The Dark World certainly does let it rip, but it's at the expense of the title character. There's a lot here that feels like reading a really fun issue of the comic book, but the fun only lasts until the credits. The movie starts to fade from memory as soon as 10. The fun is transient, feeling less like a movie than just another episode in a Thor TV series. I hope that's not the future for Marvel sequels. Dot in many ways at The Dark World is a big improvement over Kenneth Branagh's first author movie from 2011. The sequel feels much less earthbound, taking place in fantastical realms and opening up the scope a great deal. It's a considerably bigger movie. The action is better, staged, and much more plentiful. There are no scenes as staggeringly awful as the Jeremy Renner Hawkeye insert that was wedged into the original to tie it to the Avengers. Director Alan Taylor, best known for his work on every good cable show you've ever watched, most notably A Game of Thrones. Keeps a lot of balls juggling in the air, perhaps too many really, as the film is unfortunately overstead. It's a more entertaining movie than the first, because it never really slows down and nearly every character gets at least one individual moment to shine. By the time the climax comes, a round in which characters are chasing and fighting one another as they fall through different realms, the movie is finally completely clicking. It's a wonderful sequence and a good way to close out the film on a high. But the sequel sacrifices the best aspect of the original movie, the character of Thor. Whereas most superhero origin movies are about ordinary humans who must learn to be heroes, a Thor had the unique advantage of being about a powerful hero who had to learn how to be human. Thor had an interesting arc in the first movie, and Chris Hemsworth's performance as the brash and arrogant demigod who was humble turned him into a movie star. Overnight, a Thor the Dark World that doesn't give Thor any such arc. Hardly anyone changes at all as a character in this movie. There's just a bunch of stuff that happens loosely tied together by a filmy plot. Some emotional beats are recycled from the first movie, dulling their impact. The relationships between Thor and his brother Loki undergoes some changes, Loki being the closest the movie has to a dynamic character this time around. But even those developments have a tendency to become undone by comic book magic. While Hemsworth is as charming as ever in the sequel, Thor practically ends up taking a backseat in his own movie. There are just too many other plots and characters to service. The movie is overstuffed, and as a result, can't see characters and plot threads through to where they need to go. It has no idea what to do with Sif and the Warriors 3, and the film is lesser for their absence. CAF in particular. What is sacrificed in character is hardly made up in story either. Sure, there is the broad outline of a plot, but it's one that's driven by underdeveloped motivations and lots of convenience. The Dark Elf Makith, Christopher Eccleston, wants the ultimate weapon Zed called the Ether because he wants ultimate power. While examining disruptions in the fabric of space, Jane Foster, returning Natalie Portman dumbed down, needier, and more shrill, is randomly taken to an alternate dimension where she is just as randomly infected by the Ether. That means that A, Thor must get it out of her before it kills her, and B, Maka sets his sights on gain. It's a forced way of making Jane matter to the story. And the stakes don't mean as much because everything that sets up the plot is just happenstance. Mleth and the Dark Elves are only slightly more interesting villains than the Avengers' generic Chitauri, or to put it back on Asian terms, the Frost Giants. Nearly every good moment in the movie belongs to Tom Hiddleston as Loki, which the filmmakers must have recognized too as they went back and shot more Loki footage, including a cameo that makes for one of the best moments in the movie. Some of the comic relief also proves problematic. Lightness has been an overall strength of the Marvel movie universe. The movies know how to balance funny moments with genuine thrills and never get bogged down in heavy self-seriousness. The Dark World is no different, offering a couple of really solid laughs. My favorite is when Thor deadpan responds, "Space is fine and plenty of goofy fun," but now the comic beats spot up somewhat. Uncomfortably against the movie's more serious moments, making it feel like there are two movies going on at the same time. It doesn't help that the film is overcrowded with characters who exist just to be comic relief. And, like with the summers of Iron Man 3, the movie makes the mistake of undercutting its strongest dramatic moment by following it immediately up with jokes. I enjoyed plenty of moments seen at Thor the Dark World, but it feels a little like a placeholder. I'm still waiting for a truly great Thor movie, as Marvel has so many of the pieces in place, chiefly Chris Hemsworth, to deliver one. What we need is a movie that offers the scope and final fathom up with the character work of Brönig's film. Then you'd really have something. So the movie feels thin on substance. But when evil elves are flying spaceships around the mystical realm of Asgard and firing lasers at a demigods, it's hard not to give yourself over to the goofy energy. As a longtime comic book reader, it's one thing to be rewarded with a movie in which Spider-Man swings around New York. It's quite another to be rewarded with a movie that doubles down on the cosmic fantasy that once seemed only possible in the pages of Marvel's finest. A Thor, the Dark World, that is only possible because Marvel has built towards the moment in which audiences would accept a movie this nerdy that's worth getting excited over, even when much of the movie isn't 'T. I enjoyed plenty of moments seen at the Dark World, but it feels a little like a placeholder. I'm still waiting for a truly great Thor movie, as Marvel has so many of the pieces in place, chiefly Chris Hemsworth, to deliver one. What we need is a movie that offers the scope and final thought with the character work of Brunig's film. Then you'd really have something. So the movie feels thin on substance. But when evil elves are flying spaceships around the mystical realm of Asgard and firing lasers at a demigods, it's hard not to give yourself over to the goofy energy. As a longtime comic book reader, it's one thing to be rewarded with a movie in which Spider-Man swings around New York. It's quite another to be rewarded with a movie that doubles down on the cosmic fantasy that once seemed only possible in the pages of Marvel's finest. A Thor, the dark world that is only possible because Marvel has built towards the moment in which audiences would accept a movie this nerdy. That's worth getting excited over, even when much of the movie isn't 'T. As we've mentioned before, among all of the current Marvel properties, at least those that fall within the current Avengers-centric universe of Thor is perhaps the toughest sell. Instead of super soldiers and robots and powered suits, we have gods and monsters and magical realms all somehow wrapped within this framework of our existing reality-based superhero pantheon. As a result, Kenneth Branagh probably made a wise choice by focusing on Thor's Chris Hemsworth presence on Earth and his burgeoning relationship with Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, and Thea 2011. Entry. Indeed, the first film's weakest moments were those that took place in his home world of Asgard, in no small part because Asgard never felt real. It's not that audiences can't buy a fantasy setting, even one juxtaposed with our existing world. It's that Asgard simply felt poorly rendered, like a clumsy aping of Rivendell during an acid trip, coupled with the fact that the Asgardian dialogue was often a bit clunky. Tony Stark's "Doth Mother Know You Wear With Her Drapes" line was a bit too close to home, and it's no surprise that the scenes in New Mexico were the better ones. However, in Thor, the dark world of Game of Thrones as a director, Alan Taylor now has the advantage of the scene being set and of audiences accepting the peculiarities of these pseudo-gods and can therefore take that ball and run. The new film is focused heavily on Asgard, and thanks to some terrific set design and visual effects, it's actually quite stunning this time around. A sparkling, lush, substantial-seeming world that has far more life breathed into it than before. In this second go-round, Jane Foster stumbles upon a millennia-old substance known as the Ether, capable of all sorts of terrible things. The Ether is being sought by Molokoth Christopher Eccleston, a dark elf who has been around since the dawn of time, who seeks to use it to bring eternal darkness to all of the universe's realms, thanks to a moment in time when all the worlds will be closest to each other, called the Convergence. Yes, this is all utter gobbledygook. And no, watching it doesn't actually help it make more sense. It's preposterous, fantastically comic booky, science fiction, fantasy, foofery, and by God do they sell it hard. A Thor, the dark world that is filled to bursting with weird wordplay and stern, solemn proclamations of magical silliness, so much so that it occasionally drives itself off the dock rails. And yet when you add up its parts, it works and works well far, more often than it fails. This is in no small part due to the game efforts of Hemsworth, Anthony Hopkins as the effortlessly noble Odin, and the earthbound contingent of Portman's Jane, as well as her sidekick and surprisingly effective comic relief, Kat Dennings as Darcy. The chemistry between Hemsworth and Portman is solid now, with the added wrinkle of the fact that A, she has been brought to Asgard, and B, she's in some ways the reason all of this chaos has come into play. Hemsworth is still a giant charming lug of a fellow who, after 3 films now, seamlessly portrays the spectacularly powerful god of thunder with a plum and surprising wry humor that nicely complements his newfound maturity. The supporting players are all enjoyable as well, including an all too much brief turn by Renee so as Thor's mother, Freya, and a strong, understated, and that's saying something, considering he plays a golden-armored magical gatekeeper performance by Idris Elba as Himnel. Sadly, once again, the parts of Sifheim Alexander and the Warriors 3 race Stevenson as V-Stag Tattoo as Hogan, and newcomer Zachary Levi taking over as Fandral are underused yet again, but it's a crowded scene in there. If there's a weak spot, it's the villain. Eccleston, an extremely charismatic and versatile actor, is utterly wasted as Mocketh, buried under prosthetics and with his voice mangled by effects. Any possibility of nuance or creativity is utterly stifled. Instead, he's simply evil for the sake of evil, a marble-mouthed, emotionless automaton who is never even remotely compelling or even particularly fearsome. Thankfully, Tom Hiddleston's Loki is there to pick up the slack. This time around, Loki has been imprisoned after his destructive efforts seen at the Avengers, and he's freed by Thor to help him trap Malek. Hiddleston slides into the role of looking like he's been doing it all his life, and he is evil, malicious, complex, tragic, and utterly spectacular. He's easily the best part of the film, between his viciously sarcastic barbs to his amazingly expressive face, to his ability to squeeze every last drop of conniving cleverness out of the role, while still giving it remarkable depth. In the hands of a lesser talent, Loki would be reduced to a scenery-chewing buffoon or one-note manis. In Hiddleston's stance, he's a multi-layered lunatic, and I could watch him all day woven into this weird, occasionally confusing, ridiculous story, and these mostly delightful performances is a thoroughly enjoyable, breathlessly paced film. The first film suffered from a bit of lag as much time was spent on exposition and world building. With those things already established at the Dark World, is able to move at a much faster clip, and it basically explodes right off the blocks. It's a far more action-packed epic, with much of the storytelling being done on the flight or woven deftly into the major action pieces. The action itself is mostly excellent, particularly a stunningly rendered assault on Asgard itself, and a wild mind warping and often hilarious battle between Thor and Makath and his forces that involves London, a spaceship, and frequent boats of random, accidental interdimensional teleportation. It has to be seen to be believed, but while the film isn't always making a ton of sense, it's never boring. Best of all, the action is well designed and clearly and cleverly thought out. There's excellent use of space and perspective, and you can actually assa what's happening without it being edited into oblivion. Thor, the dark world that occasionally suffers from a needlessly complex and wacky story, and a villain that fails to resonate or be even remotely memorable, but by God, it is a fun. Taylor has directed the massive, wildly ambitious entry into this universe, and he's done a bang-up job, much like Iron Man 3. It's essentially a standalone entry with little more than passing references to the other films, with only a glorious exception that I refuse to spoil. However, the stakes are vast, and the characters are all suitably overwhelmed and willing to go the distance to stop the threat. Everyone is playing their part enthusiastically. The action is often flat-out bananas, and every second of Tom Hiddleston is wonderfully wicked. Joy. For those reasons alone, it beats out its predecessor and is absolutely worth a couple of hours of your life. Even in a shared cinematic universe that features super soldiers and men who transform into giant green monsters when they get a bit cross, Thor always seemed like a bit of an outsider when it came to becoming an iconic film character. Injecting Norse mythology into Marvel's more science fiction-orientated world seemed like it would be destined to lead to a work of disastrous camp. While Kenneth Branagh's Thor was a somewhat divisive film, with some saying its goofy sense of humor went too far in deflating the pomposity of its faux Shakespearean stylings, and others, myself included, saying that it struck just the right balance between the two. Its main success was in establishing Thor, played with sly wit and bountiful charisma by Chris Hemsworth, as believable if larger-than-life character, and it took him on an interesting journey from arrogant god to humble worthy hero. The downside of taking Thor on that journey in the first film presents itself fairly early on in the Alan Taylor-directed sequel. If he's not a pompous, bellowing loud, assured of his own power, Thor is kind of a drip. Much of what made the first film such fun was the fact that it was a fish-out-of-water comedy in which a man who cavorts around like a Viking has to figure out modern-day Earth. While there are glimmers of the old Thor in Hemsworth's performance, particularly in an early battle scene in which he dispatches his enemies with the rice. Smile. He's a more stoic, brooding presence than he was before, intent on mooning over his distant love, Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, then the business of preparing to rule the realm of Asgard in the stead of his father, Odin, Anthony Hopkins. Thor the Dark World follows the lead of its protagonist by being an altogether more serious offering than its predecessor. Taylor, a veteran television director who is probably best known for his work on The Sopranos and more apropos for the world of Thor Game of Thrones, tones down most of the excesses of Bren's Asgard, making it less dello and chintzy in favor of more somber autumnal hues. It's not a bad decision considering that much more of the story takes place on Asgard this time around, and the old colors would have become headache-inducing if exposed to for too long. But it has underlined the sense that the series is rapidly heading further away from the light touch that made the first film so enjoyable. Not that the film is entirely without the sense of fun, but it's contained mainly to the scenes on Earth where Jane and her intern Darcy Cat Dennings investigate bizarre gravitational anomalies similar to those that appeared when Thor first arrived on Earth. This ties into the broader plot, which sees a group of long, banished dark elves led by Christopher Eccleston under pounds of makeup seeking to take advantage of a convergence of the 9 different realms to conquer them all. But it's mainly an opportunity for Portman Dennings and Still and Skarsgård Dean Road to play the cheerful support team to Thor, complete with scenes of Skarsgård Dean Road running naked around Stonehenge and Portman engaging in an obviously doomed relationship with Chris O'Dowd. The other font of humor in this film comes in the form of Tom Hiddleston's Loki, returning as a Hannibal Lecter figure who offers a little quid pro quo in order to help defeat the Dark Elves. As was the case in Thor and the Avengers, Stun energizes the screen pretty much every second that he is on it, purely because he's clearly having such a good time being bad and watching him gleefully run. Circles around everyone else is hugely entertaining. Unfortunately, he's sidelined for much of the film. And whenever he is included, it only serves to highlight just how bland the actual villains are. It probably wouldn't have been wise to have him be the main villain in 3 consecutive films. But it does mean that his main role is to save the film from its somewhat glump first hour, rather than to help bolster an all-around entertaining experience. However, once Loki truly enters the fray, Thor, the Dark World does gel into something much more satisfying. The plot remains murky, the Dark Elves uninteresting, and the tone generally a bit morose. But it does develop a fantastic energy that propels it to its climax with great zest. In particular, the action is very well staged and makes good use of the aforementioned anomalies, allowing for some witty, physics-defying sequences. Even at its low points, Hemsworth and the cast keep the things moving. It's just a shame that the film takes over an hour to become the sort of fun blockbuster that the first film was from the start. True to my nature as an optimist, however, I will highlight the positive points of the new production. First, Chris Hemsworth is the perfect choice to play the stoic, unemotional, dispassionate, apathetic, unmoved Nordic leading deity. To a T. Actually, I'm not sure these are good points. It does not require a whole lot of animation to jump from the sky, punch someone out, or throw a hammer. Hemsworth does a very good job in his portrayal of such a character. And as long as he does not try to break the acting ceiling like he did in Snow White and the Huntsman, I think we'll be all right. The other good thing about this movie, and it's probably the best, is Lucky Tom Hiddleston, Midnight in Heaven. Paris, the deeply troubled younger, and let's not forget, adopted brother of the first Prince of Asgard. It's his 3rd appearance in the role, and he has grown quite comfortable as the smirking conniving schemer. Here he makes every scene he's in delectable. It's too bad. he is not in more. Plus, the sequences where he appears with Hemsworth are not only the best in the picture, but they elevate the latter status and acting credentials even higher than they should be. Okay, we have discussed the positive. Now, let's look at the concerns, replacing first installment director Kenneth Branagh, who was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director A and Lead Actor A for 1989's. Henry V eliminated the whole Shakespearean angle with The Fallen Brother, The Trouble Prince, and World Where King, which punctuated the action scenes and made for much more intelligent viewing than your average superhero narrative. Alan Taylor, while adept at television drama, several installments of Mad Men, Game of Thrones, and a host of others, has not helmed a feature film since Kill the Va, poor in 2003. His contribution to this feature, at least as far as the Bard connection goes. A is negligible, and thus much of the drama of Thor is replaced with the mediocre of standard fights, screaming, and explosions. Yes, a Thor. The Dark World looks good, but there is a troubling blandness and sameness to the Enterprise. Sadly underused or misused in some cases are Anthony Hopkins, Red 2 as King Odin, Natalie Portman, Black Swan, Stalin, Scarecon Road, the girl with the dragon tattoo as Dr. Eric Salvig, and Christopher Eccleston, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra as the main villain. Hey, that's right. Loki isn't even too top bad guy here. A moth. Hopkins is given even less screen time than in the first film. While Portman moans and nags so much about Thor being away, one understands his reasoning completely. She is both bland and annoying, a difficult tightrope to walk. See Mr. Megarium's Wonder Emporium for a perfect example. Meanwhile, Skarsgård Road has been reduced to a comic relief buffoon, and Eccleston, who began his career in 1991 in a great little British film, Let Him Have It, is easily one of the worst villains of all time. Sort of a lightweight Bane, but without the menacing demeanor, heavily made up and CGI'd to the point of complete obscurity. He comes back after failing numerous times in the past to use the all-powerful ether to blow all of the realms to pieces for whatever that's worth. The best spy war and superhero movies have one thing in common: a great and terrifying bad guys. Goldfinger, Darth Vader, Lex Luthor, Loki Mleet is certainly a name we'll remember in the annals of film's evil malefactors. Few will remember the plot of Faith or The Dark World as well. Basically, Oscar is under assault from Mole, and Thor is forced to release Loki from prison, where he has been since the end of the Avengers, to aid in the protection of the realms. The real drama is whether the kid brother can be trusted. Seems a logical concern to me. There are trips to other planets, and Earth gets a few location shots. Monsters are destroyed, good guys are pounded, and for a while we wonder if anyone can survive the onslaught of out-of-control special effects. One funny sequence involves Thor and Mleth bouncing around the universe, while the mighty hammer of the Norse god struggles vainly just to keep up with the action. The Dark World 2013, directed by Alan Taylor, starring Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, Tom Hiddleston, abs faced with an enemy that even Odin and Asgard cannot withstand. Thor must embark on his most perilous and personal journey yet, one that will reunite him with Jane Foster and force him to sacrifice everything to save us. All at Thor. The Dark World is a good sequel, managing to surpass the first Thor film. Maybe it's because this one isn't bogged down by an original story, or maybe it's because the filmmakers have found a solid footing with Thor after the Avengers. But this Thor film felt like it had more to offer. The story seemed more cohesive, and the characters had more dimension. Thor must fight a race of dark elves who ruled the universe thousands of years ago. These creatures were originally prevented from restoring the world to darkness by Thor's grandfather. The enemy story is a little generic, but the dark elves look striking enough to be memorable. The uniforms of the soldier elves are definitely freaky. They are after the ether, a power source that happens to come into contact with Jane Foster and is absorbed into her body. Thor takes her to Asgard to protect her and figure out how to keep it away from the dark elves who have been reawakened by the Aether's activity. This was a good time to release a sequel to Thor because of Loki's position after the Avengers. Perhaps it is because I have watched the Avengers a couple times since it left theaters, but Loki's attack on Earth is still fresh in my mind. His snark also fills a void left by Thor's serious attitude that was originally relieved by some of the other Avengers. This puts him in a good spot as someone you root for during the movie, despite his questionable motives, adding a lot of depth to the story. Again, the environments that were created for the film are magnificent. The scenery and the lore of the Thor really add a lot to the movie overall. Also, Anthony Hopkins seems more invested in his role this time around. Not to say he didn't act well in the first film. He just seems more like his old self. After not seeing Natalie Portman in any movie since the first of Thor up, it was nice just to watch her in something again. Her and Thor don't have the most solid romantic base, but her and Hemsworth make it work. The film gives her a chance to put her scientist skills to work in this finale. So it's not just Thor saving the world on his own. Thor: The Dark World is one of my favorite Marvel movies. If you have enjoyed any of the other movies by the studio, I would recommend giving the new Thor watch. It is a fun theater film and would have been right at home during the summer lineup if Iron Man 3A hadn't taken that spot. Diving into Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in 2013, the year of stacked comic book movie, started with the Iron Man 3A and ended with another sequel featuring another Avengers member, Thor: The Dark World. Although the original Thor from 2011 might be a hit-or-miss origin story for some, I still think it was fun enough that'll hopefully lead to something better just 2 years later. The hype was there for the cosmic follow-up, as it was one of my most anticipated blockbusters of the fall movie season. Many had the expectations that this would be an improvement over its predecessor. And when I enjoyed it, I also hoped this would be better. And when I saw it opening weekend, my initial reaction was good. Didn't love it. But after watching it again for the third time now, it's not terrible. It was just one of those Marvel films that's very underwhelmed. In ancient times, the gods of Asgard fought and won a war against an evil race known as the Dark Elves. The survivors were neutralized, and their ultimate weapon at the Aether was buried in a secret location. Hundreds of years later, Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, finds the Aether and becomes a host, forcing Thor, Chris Hemsworth to bring her to Asgard before Dark Elf Macath Christopher Eccleston captures her and uses the weapon to destroy the 9 realms, including Earth Thor. The Dark World is a movie that has shades of fun thrown in here, and shades that made it feel rather dull to even remember. There are some elements that are improved much more than last time. For instance, I appreciated how there's more time dedicated in Asgard because a majority of the first installment was on Earth, where Thor didn't have his powers and has to learn a lesson. This lets you know it won't be a problem this time, since you get a lot of action in Asgard in different places in the universe too. Please everybody. This phase explores more of the sci-fi fantasy realm with what's to come in a grounded fashion. Later on, as they attach director Alan Taylor to take over for Kenneth Branagh, he might be a good eye for depicting fantasy world, since he directed several Game of Thrones as episodes. He's able to make everything in this world beautiful looking. That said, Taylor's direction in keeping the tradition of making the sequel darker felt like an elective class that sounds interesting on paper, only to find out it's not as exciting as you wanted it to be. Just waiting to get excellent. I've always thought of this as a movie, and the way it was executed now was the only to pave towards the next Avengers sequel to further along. The plot is more cookie-cutter superhero fluff to pass the time that doesn't require detailed depth or have many moments of amazement on screen. When it's there, it gives the movie the needed energy, but the rest feels tiring, and that shouldn't be the case for a film featuring Thor. I don't know if it was a rush production process to put this out 2 years after the first, but I sense a lack of attachment over a few elements, or it didn't have me that interested in a more predictable film than before. Chris Hemsworth puts on the armor and carries the mighty hammer for the third time now, and he still elevates his performances to have us know he doesn't need the other Avengers to tag along with on his latest adventure yet. Thor might not be the first character to think of her reliability in this world and being a god to protect everyone. Still, his embodiment of him stays true despite this not furthering the character as much. Natalie Portman returns to give an acceptable performance as Jane Foster. But unfortunately, while I didn't mind the chemistry between her character and Thor from their last interaction, they didn't care for their romance here. This made me question why the script needed Jane to return besides serving as the plot's damsel. But if everybody loves one character in the movie, that's the scene. Stealer, that's Loki. They knew we loved him from the other appearances, especially after reigning chaos of the Bible. Avengers, thinking he's in the right to achieve greatness. Aurelia wanted more of him since the first half has him imprisoned. But Tom Hiddleston's performance still makes us believe he's impossible to know if he'll betray those around him. Once Thor had to team up with his adopted brother, those brotherly moments for a little vengeance are genuinely great since both actors work so well together. When reshoots occurred, more scenes of Loki were added, even changing the ending not to have him killed off. But by far the biggest problem with the film is, unfortunately, the villain while lack from seeing this in theaters to even now. I still consider him the worst villain inside the MCU, because as much as we usually know the franchise for its lackluster bad guys, this is a prime example. All he's made out to be is a generic, one-dimensional dark elf who wants control of the ether and covers the world in darkness. Never once did I find him to have a real threatening presence for our hero. Interestingly enough, they offered Mads Mikkelsen the part first, but he starred in Thea Hannibal TV series instead. Honestly, I found Loki to be evil than him or his Lieutenant Curse, a dual Kinag beige, since he was more involved with the action when he literally turned into beast mode. Christopher Eccleston has since expressed his disappointment with his role, saying they cut many of his character's backstory out of the finished film. Just seems like he was taking a paycheck with the G.I. Joe, the rise of Cobra. With the rest of this supporting cast, they were again suitable for the material they were working from. From Anthony Hopkins as Odin, Idris Elba making him more of a badass this time. Jamie Alexander, who I'd love to more of as Sif, and Rene Russo got a bit more to do as Queen Freya. The other aspect I couldn't stand was the humor. This might have been the first MCU movie where I noticed the comedy falling flat, and a large chunk of the comic relief comes from Kat Dennings as Darcy Lewis. I like Dennings as Darcy. She was annoying throughout, and I was waiting for the Earth scenes to be done because there was no need for her, especially with her and her Tyrion Jonathan Howard. However, I thought there were a couple of chuckle-worthy moments, including one of my favorite Marvel cameos. The action sequences are well-directed and more vastly different from the original, especially since we see more of Thor kicking ass, and the visual effects hold up 9 years later. Were the stakes high? Not really. They didn't blow me away. The climax made it cool, involving portals around vast universes in Greenwich. That's pretty creative, but you aren't caring about the fight with Thor and Moleth when the outcome is already known. Of all the movies to have come out in the saga, Aether the Dark World is usually placed near the bottom of every Marvel ranking, which shouldn't be a surprise. The mixed positive reception didn't affect the box office. 26.3 million domestic, 644.7 million worldwide, yet it currently sits at 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, the second lowest rated MCU film. The most interesting tidbit was that of Wonder Woman. A director, Patty Jenkins, was attached to direct at one point with our Romeo-Juliet inspired plot in mind. A She left due to creative differences, and Portman stayed on despite joining the project because of Jenkins' involvement. In another universe, I would have loved to see her movie. But besides, Hemsworth recently said to Vanity Fair that it disappointed him how he thought he didn't grow with the character. Taylor was disappointed with the finished film and blamed Marvel for changes he didn't like. He said there's a director's cut out there, but nobody cares at this point. I walked in the theater with high expectations while cushioning my heart for failure. The first Thor movie had me making googly eyes at the Norse god of thunder and by natural law of transitivity to Chris Hemsworth. Thor's stint at that epic movie mashup that is Thea of Anders solidified my fandom, and thanks to his charismatic, intelligent portrayal in both movies and the actor's charming Twitter antics and appearances, my affection grew for the god of mischief, a Loya, and by the same transitive law, a Tom Hiddleston. Historically, with that much bias and high hopes, disappointment is sure to follow. Add to that the slew of trailers released for Thor: The Dark World. The sneak peek of the visuals were definitely breathtaking. The action scenes orchestrated to be massive with Thor and Jane Foster reunited at last. Feared the film will fall back on those elements. ACG effects, winding action sequences, a flimsy love angle, all held up by a soup of a story. Thor: The Dark World's success is built on the harmonic marriage between its greatest tacit, the literally epic realms wherein Thor and the Asgardian live and prosper, and the mortal human relationships that somehow makes everything believable. Udna claims we are not gods, and as the film moves, you believe him. Thor is not invulnerable. His hammer, Jolnera, is not invincible. Odin, though the owl, father is not God, omniscient and ever wise, and was actually revealed to be narrow-minded, arrogant, and discriminating at his worst. The characters have to make choices and sacrifices just like any mortal. Ahim Vandrologa. And the Lady Sifa chose to reason in full tester in support of Thor. Sif chose to look past her unrequited love and take up her warrior spear instead. A Queen of Phrygia as brave spar with them. All obviously had no wholly triumphant end, but still I was hopeful until the blade slid through her flesh. Since I speak of hope, this might be the best segue to the most important relationship of all in the film. The Avengers' triumph in New York ended with Loki, a master diva of the evil plot. In shackles and behind Asian bars, we see him unrepentant, unaffected by Odin's might and venom. But we see that Frigga can reach him with Odin, and maybe even Thor could not, and there sparks the flicker of hope when Thor approaches him with a thinly sealed pact. Thor's frankness about his complete lack of trust of him, an absent desire to grieve for their common loss, could have been the best way to approach the sly Loki. Thor made it known to Loki that he is stronger, wiser, less like gullible than before. But when they were playing out the plot together, Thor and Loki's bickering and natural chemistry showed that their bond lies deeper than both would recognize. Loki's willingness to lend his talents and magic to Thor's cause to protect Jane and fight for them reveals the slim possibility that he may not be too far gone. Yes, I say that even with how the film ended. Dotane's relationship with Thorpe Central in the first film is a crucial plotline here. 2, albeit less so than Loki's, their easy chemistry and strong attraction that went beyond realms anchored the film to Earth, pun intended. I liked it that Jane, though not a warrior princess, like Sif, was not the typical damsel in distress. She is intelligent, confident, and brave enough to hold her own, even in front of Asgardian royalty. Although she started the movie as a host to one of the most menacing energies in the universe, Thor could not have saved the 9 realms without her scientific genius and her team. That said, the film benefits greatly from its stellar cast, led by the charismatic, much-improved Chris Hemsworth, who brings the God of Thunder to realistic life, flanked by superstars and Natalie Portman, Anthony Hopkins, Rene Russo, Christopher Eccleston, Stellan Skarsgård, among many others. And of course, the one and only Tom Hiddleston, a Thor. The Dark World was equipped with more than CGI to deliver. Marvella movie magic. Is this still my bias word? Definitely. This review is my personal opinion after all. But if I have managed to entice you to watch a Thor: The Dark World, then my work here is done. See you again for a Captain America: The Winter Soldier and X-Men. Days of Future Past. As I had stated in my review of Iron Man 3, I had assumed that the release of the 2012 blockbuster at the Avengers would signal the end of Marvel's multi-film saga about the group of comic book heroes and their government allies Shelled. Not only DA Iron Man 3A proved me wrong, but also the recent television series Agents of High TLDA and the Va, second movie about the God of Thunder, or the Dark World like the 2011 movie. Or this latest film begins thousands of years ago, back in day or year B, the father of Odin clashed with the Dark Elves of Spartum and their leader Mleth, who seeks to destroy the universe using a weapon known as the Ether. After conquering Mleth's forces, hides the Ether within a stone column. He was also so unaware that Maketh, his lieutenant, Algrim, and a handful of Dark Elves have managed to escape by going into suspended animation. Many years later, Thorn and his fellow Asgardians, which include his friends Lady Sif, Vandral, and Volstagg, help their comrade Hogun repel marauders on the latter's homeworld, Vanaheim. It proves to be the last battle in a war to pacify the 9 realms, which had fallen into chaos following the destruction of the Biff Freight till de Pilgro Street, and in London astrophysicist Dr. Jane Foster is led by her intern Darcy Lewis and latter's intern to an abandoned factory where objects have begun to disobey the laws of physics by disappearing into thin air. Jane is teleported to another world where she is infected by the Ether. Both the Asgardians and Jane's former mentor, Dr. Eric Selvig, learn on the separate occasions that the convergence, a rare alignment of the 9 realms, is imminent. While the event approaches, portals, one of which Jane had fallen into, linking the worlds, appear at random. Alerts Thor of Jane's recent disappearance, leading the latter to search for her on Earth, when she inadvertently releases an unearthly force upon a group of London policemen. Thor takes her to Asgard. Unfortunately, the Asgardian healers do not know how to treat her. Odin, recognizing the Ether, warns Jane's infection will kill her given enough time, and that the Ether's return heralds a catastrophic prophecy. Unbeknownst to Odin, the reemergence of the Ether also ends the Dark Elves' suspended animation and revives their determination to use the substance to darken the universe. Thor: The Dark World has proven to be a major box office since its release nearly a month ago. This is not surprising considering the enormous success of Marvel's Avengers saga. Iron Man 3, set 6 months after the events of the 2012 film, also proved to be a big hit. Some people have claimed that the first film about Thor was superior. As much as I had enjoyed it, Thor, I cannot say that I would agree it were just a bit too much of a superhero origin tale. Personally, I found the plot for a Thor: The Dark World and more satisfying. Mind you, this second God of Thunder movie did not strike me as perfect. It had a few flaws. Although I applaud director Alan Taylor and cinematographer Kramer Morgan, those expansion of the acid setting beyond the Royal Palace and the Biff Freight to Pilgro Street, the latter's photography for that particular setting, seemed to lack Harrison Barrow's dazzling and colorful photography from the 2011 film. Instead, there seemed to be a slightly dull cast to Morgan's photography of Asgard. Thor's friends did not particularly project that same screen chemistry that I found so enjoyable in the first film. Aside from one major scene in which Thor plotted Jane's escape from Asgard, they rarely had any scene and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.